Renu Rana Ra.
On this occasion I will convey the history of Esarhadon. Esarhadon was the third king of the Sargonid dynasty of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. He was the youngest son of King Sennacherib, and his mother was not the queen but a secondary wife, Zakutu. He is best known for rebuilding Babylon, which was destroyed by Sennacherib. He claimed the gods had ordained him to restore Babylon and cleverly omitted from his inscriptions anything that would implicate his father in the city's fall, thereby presenting himself as a benefactor with no personal interest in the project. In his diplomatic letters he seems equally careful to characterize himself as a just and objective monarch. He maintained, then enlarged, the empire his father had left to him, and his reign ensured stability and prosperity in the region. He died on campaign in Egypt in 669 BCE and left the throne to his son, Ashurbanipal, the last great king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Sennacherib had over 11 sons with his various wives and chose as heir his favorite, Ashur-nadin-shumi, the eldest of those born of his queen Tashmetasheret. Esarhadon, born in 713 BCE, was the son of Zakutu, one of Sennacherib's secondary wives. Sennacherib appointed Ashur-nadin-shumi to rule over Babylon and, while fulfilling his duties, the prince was kidnapped by the Elamites and taken to Elam. Sennacherib mounted an enormous expedition to retrieve his son but was defeated. It is thought that Ashur-nadin-shumi was then killed by his captors sometime around 694 BCE. After the defeat of the Assyrian army by the Elamite coalition, Sennacherib returned to his capital at Nineveh and busied himself with building projects and running his empire. He needed to choose a new heir but seems to have taken his time in deciding who that would be. It could be that, during this time, he was evaluating his sons, or it could simply be that he was still grieving the loss of his favorite and did not wish to replace him. In any case, it was not until 683 BCE that Sennacherib declared Esarhadon, his youngest son, as heir. While his inscription tells the basic story, it is not the whole one. It appears that, after Sennacherib announced his choice, the brothers made clear their displeasure and Zakutu sent Esarhadon into hiding. Exactly where he went is unknown, but it was somewhere in the region formerly held by the Mitanni. In c. 689 BCE Sennacherib had sacked and destroyed the city of Babylon, carrying off the statue of the great god Marduk, and this had not met with the approval of the Assyrian court or the people of the empire. Babylon and Assyria shared many of the same gods, and an affront to Marduk of Babylon was a sacrilege which could not be tolerated. In 681 BCE Sennacherib was assassinated by two of his sons. While they certainly could have been motivated to kill him to take the throne, they would have required some form of justification, and the destruction of Babylon would have served that purpose well. Their names are not known outside of the biblical versions given in 2 Kings 19 and Isaiah 37 verse 38, where they are called Adramelech and Sharezer. Following the assassination, the two princes fled Nineveh and sought refuge with the king of Urartu, Rusas II. At this point Esarhadon was recalled from exile and fought his brother's factions for the throne. After a 6-week civil war, he emerged victorious, executed his brother's families, associates, and all who had joined their cause, and took the throne. Esarhadon carefully distanced himself from his father's reign and, especially, from the destruction of Babylon. Even though he identifies himself as the son of Sennacherib and grandson of Sargon II in other inscriptions, in order to make clear that he is the legitimate king, in his inscriptions concerning Babylon he is simply the king whom the gods have ordained to set things right. Sennacherib is only referenced as Auroi, an earlier king Euro in a former time. The propaganda worked, in that there is no record that he was associated in any way with the destruction of the city, only with the rebuilding. His inscriptions also claim that he personally participated in the restoration project. He rebuilt the entire city, from the temples to the temple complexes to the homes of the people and the streets, and, to make sure everyone would remember their benefactor, inscribed the bricks and stones with his name. Although the prophecies concerning the rebuilding of Babylon had said that the city would not be restored for 70 years, Esarhadon manipulated the priests to read the prophecy as 11 years. He did this by having them read the cuneiform number for 70 upside down so that it meant 11, which was exactly the number of years he had planned for the restoration. Since he maintained a lifelong interest in astrology and prophecy, it has seemed strange to some scholars that he would manipulate the priests in this way and discredit the integrity of the oracles. It seems, however, that he had a very clear vision for his reign and, even though he did believe in the signs from the gods, he was not going to allow that belief to stand in the way of achieving his objectives. With Babylon restored, Esarhadon set about expanding and improving upon his empire. The Cimmerians, nomadic tribe of the north, were threatening his western borders, and the kingdom of Urartu, which his grandfather had defeated in 714 BCE, had risen again in the north. His two brothers, who had killed their father, were still there under the protection of King Rusas II who, like the Urartu kings before him, had no love for the Assyrians. In order to keep the Cimmerians at bay, Esarhadon entered into a treaty with the Scythians, another nomadic tribe known for their skill in cavalry warfare. Although he felt he needed their help, he did not trust them as allies. Esarhadon consulted his oracles regarding Urartu, the Cimmerians, and the Scythians, and his questions are preserved on divination tablets. While Esarhadon was consulting the oracles, the Cimmerians invaded from the west in 679 BCE. By 676 BCE they had fought their way further into Assyrian-held lands and conquered Phrygia, destroying the cities and temples. Esarhadon met the Cimmerians in battle at Cilicia and defeated them. He claims in his inscriptions to have killed their king, Tushpa, with his own sword. At the same time the Cimmerians had invaded, the city of Sidon in the Levant rebelled against Assyrian rule and Esarhadon marched down the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, defeated the rebel king, and executed him. He then turned about and marched against the allies of Urartu, the Manians, to the northeast and, by early 673 BCE, was at war with Urartu itself. What happened to his brothers is unknown, but Urartu was again beaten back by the Assyrian army and, if the brothers were still alive when Esarhadon defeated the Urartu, he would no doubt have had them executed. Having now secured his borders, Esarhadon sought to expand them. Egypt had been a problem for the Assyrians in his father's reign and was still encouraging dissent and revolt in the Assyrian Empire. In 673 BCE Esarhadon launched his first military campaign against Egypt and, thinking to storm Egypt in one furious push, marched his army at great speed. This proved to be a mistake. When they met the Egyptian forces under the Kushite pharaoh Tiraka outside the city of Ashkelon, the Assyrians were exhausted and quickly defeated. Esarhadon withdrew from the field and his army limped back to Nineveh. Esarhadon learned from his mistake and, in 671 BCE, took his time and brought a much larger army slowly down through Assyrian territory and up to the Egyptian borders, then he ordered the attack. The Egyptian cities fell quickly to the Assyrians and Esarhadon drove the army forward down the Nile Delta and captured the capital city of Memphis. Although Tiraka escaped, Esarhadon captured his son, wife, family, and most of the royal court and sent them, along with much of the population of Memphis, back to Assyria. He then placed officials loyal to him in key posts to govern his new territory and returned to Nineveh. His victory is commemorated on his famous victory stele of 671 BCE now in the Pergamon Museum of Berlin, Germany. The stele depicts Esarhadon in his full majesty, holding a war mace, with an attendant king kneeling at his feet and Tiraka's son, also kneeling abjectly, with a rope around his neck. His eldest son and heir, Sinadina Apla, had died in 672 BCE, and Esarhadon now chose his second son, Ashurbanipal, as his successor. He forced his vassal states to swear loyalty in advance to Ashurbanipal in order to avoid any revolts over the future succession. At about this same time, Esarhadon's mother Zakutu issued the loyalty treaty of Nakiye Zakutu, which compelled the Assyrian court and those territories under Assyrian rule to accept and support the reign of Ashurbanipal. In order to avoid the kind of conflict he had gone through with his brothers, Esarhadon also provided for his youngest son, Shamash-shum, by decreeing he should be king of Babylon. Esarhadon seems to have just finished setting his affairs in order when news reached him that Egypt had rebelled. Many of the trusted officials he had left in charge of cities and provinces had become sympathetic to Egyptian liberation and, no doubt, were profiting handsomely from their positions and were disinclined to send tribute back to Nineveh. In 669 BCE, Esarhadon mobilized his army and marched again on Egypt. He had never been in the best of health throughout his reign and died of natural causes before he reached the borders. It would be left to Ashurbanipal to complete his father's work and conquer Egypt for the Assyrian Empire. That's the history that I can convey this time. I hope it's useful. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe.